Hey friends, it's Stephanie here, host of the Only God podcast, sharing stories only God could write. And on today's episode, I get to interview Esther Joy King, and we talk about a lot of things, but two of the highlights for me. One, I wish I would have listened to this episode or had this episode available, or heard Esther's parents' love story of how they got together when I was in high school and college, because maybe I wouldn't have worried so much of like, does God have the right guy for me? So she's going to share that. It's definitely an only God story. And then another part or another story that she shares of like, we make plans and how God's plans are often different than the plans that we are making, but how he uses like where we wanted to go to accomplish his mission. And she has an incredible story that I got to be a little bit a part of as she was going through some of it. And I can't wait for you to hear my interview with Esther Joy King. Hey, Esther, my friend, how are you doing?
Hi, Stephanie. It's so good to be with you today.
Good. I love that we are reconnecting. It's been a hot minute since we've chatted, and both of our lives have been busy. But I want to welcome Esther Joy King to the podcast. Esther, I would love for you to start with just like our only God connection, like share with our audience, because I love starting there because it's cool to see how God works and he can intertwine anybody's lives at any time and use it for his good.
Stephanie, I do believe our friendship is a God friendship. And even as you said, we haven't connected in a long time, but something very special about the two of us is we just get to pick up. And I do think that that's very much the God in us, is that we understand one another and we just get to meet, whether it's on a spiritual level or a friendship level. So this is really special to talk with you today. To your question about how did we become friends, and I'd forgotten before we started recording, I had to be like, how did we meet again, Stephanie? Because I know we're part of the same world and we know a lot of the same people, but how did we actually meet? So you and I both love personal development, doing hard things, challenging ourselves. And so we met in a personal development community called Build Your Life Resume Coaching Group. And we originally, all of our connections were just remote and on phone calls. And anytime you spoke up, I'd be like, oh, I like what she has to say.
Same here. I was like, oh, I got to connect with this gal.
And then I came to visit you in Indiana. We only live about, I think, 4 hours maybe a drive apart. So then that sealed the deal. We're friends
Yes.
forever after we met in person.
And what I love about when you came to meet in person is my husband and I were remodeling our house and we were living in one room. And so I had to rent a hotel room and I said, Esther, you can come visit, but then we're going to go stay at like this little, local boutique. And we had a blast. And I
We
remember
did.
we had a great dinner and good chocolate cake. So
Yeah. I also remember the hotel room we stayed in was decorated with pineapples. That's like burned into my head is the pineapple decor of that hotel room.
yes, and I loved it because and I didn't really know that till we got there. And in my children's book series, Gabby, her favorite thing is a pineapple. And so she always had like it's a thing that kids always laugh about because she like has a pineapple in her backpack, not a banana or not an apple, but a pineapple. So I just love that. To me, it was almost like that little like only God thing to go, look, you gave us pineapples when we were here. So I would love for you to share. I know you have lots of stories, and I told you before we started, like I have a couple of what I think are Esther only God stories, but I know you've got other stuff. So I'll just open it up for you to
Yeah.
share whatever you want to share. And if I have a question, I'll pop in.
Yeah. Well, I will start by contextualizing my life a little bit in regards to being an only God. You're right. I do have a lot of only God stories. And I think if you have faith and expect only God to work in your life, then it creates more of those stories and opportunities for God to work. And also he's working all the time. So if you have the vision, the eyes to see God at work, that's another aspect of how the stories come about. But I am this way 100% because of my parents. They lived and demonstrated a faith-filled lifestyle, and even to my dad would say things about our family. He would say, "We are a family ordained by God." And I'll share my parents' origin story, how they met. But even in the roots of who we are as a family, we believe my dad shared it. He inculcated us kids with that God meant the King family to exist. And he brought my mom and dad together in a only God kind of way. And then they lived their life and they demonstrated that for me. I'm one of 5 kids. So they demonstrated that for all of our family, me and my brothers and sisters, to learn how to live an only God, faith filled life.
Yeah.
And so I'll just start by contextualizing that
Yeah, I would love it.
and say, like, I am this way because my parents lived this way. And so encouraging everyone who's listening to us today to see their lives through God lenses and to see God at work and to expect God to work, because it just, that faith is what enables him to be involved and to open the door wide open and say, use me, here I am, I'm yours. And my parents set me on this path. So I thank them. So I'll start with how my mom and dad met. It's my favorite story to tell. So the year was 1976. My mother was in college. She was at the University of Houston, and my father was just getting out of the military. He was kind of in a transition period and stationed in Georgia. And 1976, politically, Jimmy Carter was running for president. And both my parents were Christian, and Jimmy Carter was very vocal about his faith. And so they both said, hey, we like this candidate for president because he's so open about being a Christian. And in curiosity to learn more about Jimmy Carter, my mom, she was headed to a family reunion in North Carolina and looked on the map and realized, hey, I'm driving right through Georgia. Plains, Georgia, Jimmy Carter's hometown, is just off my route. If I do a little bit of a detour, I can stop in Plains, Georgia and buy a jar of peanut butter. That's what they're famous for in that area, and learn a little bit about Jimmy Carter. And my dad had a day off. It was a Sunday. My dad had a day off from the Army and realized, hey, I'm just a train ride away from Plains, Georgia, Jimmy Carter's hometown. So I think I'm going to hop on the train and just have a sightseeing day in Plains, Georgia. So around 9 a.m. that morning, my dad was getting off the train, walking out onto the train platform, and looked out over the parking lot of the train station and saw this young lady getting out of her car and said, that's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. I think I wanna marry her. That was the thought that entered my
Gosh.
dad's head. So, he proceeded to stalk her around the town a little bit. And visually, Plains, Georgia it's small, little, like, Americana. If whatever the little American town with Main Street that you're imagining, that's exactly what Plains, Georgia is. And so they walked around, my dad kind of following my mom. And there was a water fountain that my mom wanted to take a picture of. So growing up, I imagined this water fountain being this big, ginormous, overflowing fountain. And they took us kids back to Plains, Georgia on their
That's
5th wedding anniversary. So we saw this very spot that they met in. And it turns out this water fountain is a bird bath. It's a tiny, but my mom wanted to take a picture of this fountain. There was a gentleman in the way of her picture, so she said, I had to ask, excuse me, sir, could you please move out of my picture? They started talking, continued talking. 8 hours later, my dad proposed. My mom said yes. So they talked for 8 hours and then decided to be married. And the day was still young. It was early afternoon. And they said, hey, we don't want to say goodbye to each other yet. My mom was still headed to her family reunion on her drive, so needed to get back on the road at some point. But they asked around and they went to the small little, the general store had a soda shop counter. So they went and got milk chocolate and Fanta is what they each drank, and asked, hey, what's going on around town? And they found out that there was a softball game going on. So Jimmy Carter and his cousins were going to play softball against the Secret Service. He was running for president, but happened to be in town that day. So they went to this softball game because all of Plains, Georgia showed out for this softball game. And they ended up sitting on the front bleachers next to Rosalind Carter, Jimmy Carter's wife. And they just talked to her and chatted with her for the whole game. After the softball game, Jimmy came over. They got to just socialize with Jimmy and Rosalind, and they said, hey, what are you young people doing? Would you like to go to Sunday evening church with us?" So they went to church with Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, sat on the front pew with them for the Sunday evening service. I believe it's the First Baptist Church of Plains, Georgia, and went to church with Jimmy and Rosalind, said goodnight to Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, and then they said goodnight to one another. And my mom drove on to her family reunion. And so when they left one another, they said, the one caveat to this marriage, we want all four of our parents to agree and say, yes, we think that this is a God decision. So my mother went on and told her parents when she arrived at her family reunion, I met the man I want to marry, and they supported her in that decision. And my dad called his parents and said, Mom and Dad, his mom answered the phone, my grandmother. And my grandmother said, I already know you met your wife today. God told me.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they got engaged after 8 hours and my mom walked down the aisle 2 months later. They met in August, got married in October, and they were married for 44 years. And my mom has passed away and she's in heaven now, but they had a family and life that was all focused on God. And with that origin story, my dad always communicated to us kids, like, God has a plan and a purpose for our family, for our lives, because it was such an only God meeting
Yeah.
of love between my mom and dad, that there's no doubt that God had a plan and purpose. And my parents served as missionaries for over 30 years, and they've dedicated their lives to serving God. And so that's the beginning of my only God life.
Could end right there and I'd be like, this was a great interview today, Esther. And I don't think I've heard that story. I knew your parents were missionaries and how they
Mhm.
served, and I knew they had a long marriage and a beautiful marriage that they had and 5 kids. So thank you for sharing. I mean, I'm like tearing up. Like, where's my Kleenex? I just love these types of stories because if you're ever doubting what God can do, and I think if there's somebody listening, we live in this society where there is this pressure of if you're single to get married. And then a lot of times when you're married, you're like, is this the right person? And we can get all in it. And it's like we hear your parents' stories, and it's like, if God wants you to be with somebody or to meet with somebody, like,
Mhm.
what are the chances to orchestrate, especially even like using a president and his little hometown, and when they're dry, like, there's so many things that have to be orchestrated for that. And so I think even not even from a relationship standpoint, it's a great reminder of, like, if you are faithful and listen to those little tugs on your heart to do things that may seem a bit crazy, like,
A girl around Plains, Georgia.
yeah, exactly. And then but go, "Okay, like, these are the little kind of breadcrumbs that God's leaving that it leads to amazing, incredible things." And even though your grandmother knew that your dad was gonna meet, like, he
Mhm.
didn't know that. Amazing, I love it. Yeah, where do you wanna go? Where did your parents serve and
Parents
missionaries?
were missionaries in Mexico for over 30 years. And then, so backing up even further, my grandparents, my mother's mother and father, were missionaries as well. So I'm third generation in the ministry myself. And my grandparents were missionaries in the country of Afghanistan. So my mom was born and raised in Afghanistan and lived there until she was about 8 years old. And she loved growing up in a foreign country, loved the memories. And it was just, we always said mom left her heart in Afghanistan. She just loved that country. So fast forward to when my mom and dad became empty nesters. All of us had gone away to college. And mom said, Robert, that's my dad's name, Robert, it's time. We've been missionaries for 30 years in Mexico. There's a lot of seeds planted. There's a lot of Mexico with its geographical closeness to the United States. There's a lot of people that invest in Mexico. She said, there's plenty of missionaries in Mexico. I think we need to move to Afghanistan. In around 2008, my mom and dad moved to become missionaries in Afghanistan, and they ended up starting a school there because it's illegal to be there as a Christian. So they had to have a the term I know is a tent maker purpose, like Aquila and Priscilla were tent makers and traveled doing that career. So they started a school in Afghanistan and were there for 13 years before the withdrawal happened. They left in 2021 when we all saw the visual um, across our TVs what happened in that withdrawal experience when America withdrew from Afghanistan. But so my parents were in Afghanistan up until 2021.
Okay. Wow. So they were there quite a long time. And it's interesting how, like, God drawed them back and they were obedient in
Mhm.
going back to Afghanistan. I know you have an amazing Afghanistan story. Do you want to share it?
Yeah, that's a great jumping off
I
point.
know. I was like, perfect.
Another only God story. So kind of the groundwork. I shared my grandparents, my mom, just our family connection was strong. And even to the point where when I was in elementary school, I did US history and Afghanistan history just because my mom loved the country so much. She passed that love on to our whole family. And my grandparents were not the only missionaries during that time. In the 40s and 50s, when my grandparents moved there, there was a whole community of Americans and people that the country was kind of opening up. So a lot of Americans moved there right around that time. And that whole group of people became a community. And even when they all had to leave, when the Russians invaded and the Mujahideen took over in the 60s and 70s, that whole group of people stayed close knit. And actually, the reunion my mom was driving to when she met my dad, it was called the Kabul, Afghanistan reunion. So it was my grandparents and then all the people that lived in Kabul, Afghanistan. They together would get together every single year. So I grew up my whole child going to these reunions. So I have just this long investment in learning and loving the country of Afghanistan. So my first job out of college, I got to go to Kabul, Afghanistan with the United Nations. And that was the impetus. When I went there out of college, my mom and dad said, if our daughter's going there, we're not going to just let her go without the opportunity to go visit her.
Yeah.
So they came with me and then they never left. I left and came back to the United States after that job ended. And then they just stayed there the whole time. So fast forward to 2021, I ran, well, 2018, 2019, I ran for US Congress. So I'm in the military. I became a lawyer. I'm in the military. I had been on active duty and then stationed at the Rock Island Arsenal, which is in the Quad Cities, which is where I live today. This part of the state of Illinois that I live in, I'd seen, hey, there's a need for someone to stand up for godly values, for what I believe in. So I decided to run for United States Congress. So I ran in 2020 election cycle and it was a highly competitive race. I came within inches of winning. And then I ran again in the 2022 election cycle. And so I was in the midst of a run for United States Congress. It was one of the top targeted races in the entire country. I was also a reserve officer in the United States Army, a JAG officer, a lawyer in the Army. And so the positioning, speaking to the only God, God knew what he was doing, directing my steps. He put me in those positions and in those circumstances so that I would have a network to be able to help during the fall of Afghanistan. So my parents had seen kind of what was coming down the pipeline and they were in the United States. Well, my mom passed away in April 2021. So the withdrawal happened in August. So our family had just lost mom. She went to heaven. And that's another only God story, beautiful story as a
Yeah.
family. But so mom had gone to heaven in April and then obviously we could see what was coming with the withdrawal. And so my dad was here in the United States. His life was never at risk during the whole experience. But they had been running a school there for
Right.
13 years. So they had a staff, they had students, the students' families. And the way that my heart got involved, when my mom got sick, she was diagnosed with gastric adenocarcinoma cancer, which is a stomach cancer, January of 2021. She had been when they left Afghanistan, my mom had still she was the high school English teacher for their school in Afghanistan. And my mom had continued to teach her high school English classes remotely when they came back to the
Wow.
United States. So when my mom got sick and she just didn't have the energy, because it's the time difference, you have to wake up in the middle of the
Yeah, I
night.
can't imagine if you weren't sick.
Yeah. So I took over to just help my mom and support my mom during that time. I took over my mom's English classes. So I would wake up, I'm running for Congress at this time, I'm doing all kinds of things. And then I took over my mom's English classes. So I would wake up at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning to teach my mom's English classes to her high school class in Kabul, Afghanistan. I was grading papers. We were going through a series on Shakespeare's plays. So we were going through Julius Caesar during that time. I was grading papers on Julius Caesar and going through all these projects to get these high school kids from Kabul, Afghanistan through their senior year. And I developed a really close relationships with a few of the girls from that class, and particularly this one girl named Rahima. She was my mom's favorite student, and she was so hungry for education. She would always say, education is the key to my future. Afghans really knew and understood, if I want to go to another country or have a future, I need education. So Rahima, this young, at the time she was 13, 14 years old, and she was just so hungry for knowledge, and she would ask me for extra homework assignments so she could learn more. And there was a group of girls that after the school year ended, I continued on with a book club with them. We were doing a John Maxwell leadership book together. So just staying connected with these high school
Right.
girls and seeing and knowing what was coming and watching the Taliban descend upon Kabul. I was helping these girls. I said, I don't want you there. You're young 14-year-old girls. I know what it is from the stories from the Afghan friends I have. I knew what was coming for these girls' futures. And I said, there's no way I'm going to leave you in Afghanistan. So
Right.
I had already started to try and help these girls get education visas so they could come study and go to a boarding school in the United States. So I was already working with them to get their visa applications in so they could come study in the US. So that was in June and July of
Right.
2021 leading into August. So actually about this time and 4 years ago, and we would have been done by now, but it was late August of 2021, moment where we all saw the visual that Americans are so familiar with was the C-17 taking
Yeah,
off
the
with the
plane.
people clinging to the wheels and the wings and then the bodies falling from the sky. So earlier that day that happened, earlier that day, I'd been on the phone with Rahima, and there are 3 other friends together, and I said, "Girls, just get to the airport. I will get you on a plane, get to the airport, and I will, like, buy you a plane ticket. I'll help you get out of the country. Just get to the airport. We're already working on your visas, so I can see if I can." Because of running for Congress, I had
Right.
connections. I could figure this all out. So that day on the that experience where we all visually saw it, Rahima and these girls and some of their family members were there on the tarmac at the airport. So my experience was I was on the phone with Rahima. We were on Skype at that time, and she was narrating it to me. And at that time, she thought my name, because Esther was a little bit hard for her to pronounce as an Afghan, so she called me Miss Easter. Now like last year, she was like, "You never corrected me. I always pronounced your name wrong, and you never corrected me, Esther." But at that time, she called me Miss Easter, Miss Easter. She's like, and so she gave me a play-by-play. She's like, "Miss Easter, I'm watching people cling to the planes. Miss Easter, the plane is taking off and they haven't gotten off the plane. Miss Easter, there are bodies falling from the sky." So I was on the phone with her while she was standing on the tarmac watching all that happen. And so that was day 1. And it ended up being about a 3-week 24/7 experience where I was determined to get these girls out of Afghanistan. Particularly, a lot of my focus and intention was on Rahima because she was my mom's favorite student. And her mom had died from cancer the year before. My mom had just died from cancer. So we just had this soul connection between us. And I loved her. I still love her. She's starting college. She's in her freshman year of college right now. She's just getting started. Here, spoiler alert, she gets out of Afghanistan. That's the headline. Uh,
Pause there real
yeah,
quick
absolutely.
because one thing that, you and I were very good friends at the time, and you had such a team of prayer warriors. Like, I bet if I go back and look at my phone, texting with you and you giving us almost these play-by-play updates, and it was around the clock. And I think it is so important. Sometimes as Christians, we can kind of be in our own little bubble, trying to do things on our own, trying to be the rescue of people and, and doing it. And I think I was even amazed by you of I knew everything going on with the congressional run, with what you were trying to do in Afghanistan, but you also had prayer warriors all over because you knew prayer is so powerful, and the only way that these girls are gonna get out is if we are, storming the gates of heaven, in God, and so I just wanted to insert that because I do think sometimes we can get caught up, especially if God has this big calling on our life and we're doing something so massive that we almost feel like we don't have time to pray or we don't have time to communicate, and I just think that was really important, one of the things that you did, and it would have been easy for you to say, "I don't have time for this. I'm just going to keep, doing," because you were coordinating, and I know you can talk about that, but you were coordinating so much other things and people on the ground and all that. So I just wanted to pause and talk about that.
Such a great highlight, Stephanie, because to the only God aspect, through this entire experience, the Christians that God brought into the experience with me, alongside me. And yes, I had a whole team of prayer warriors. I also had a lot of people ask me, how can we tangibly help? And I had a whole team of people. You would not imagine how much paperwork it takes to save lives. I had a whole team of people that were helping me fill out visa applications and all, just they were at the call. We set up a war room of people just there to fill out paperwork. Like, hey, I have this person at this gate. I want to, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but you're exactly right that the team of people and the key players that I was working with. So this is jumping ahead, but one key player that was in it with me, his name was Matt. He was on the staff of Senator Tom Cotton. Senator Cotton is a veteran and he has a lot of veterans that work for him. So he knew and understood during the withdrawal period what to do and how to be effective in making a difference to help get people into the airport and out of Afghanistan. And so I worked very closely with Senator Cotton's staff during that withdrawal period. Matt and I we would be on the phone for hours at a time because we would work together. Okay, we have this family at this gate during the withdrawal, and how do we get them? And we would encourage one another and we would pray over the people. We would pray over our teams that we would have energy and sustenance during that time period. The moment that I will never forget is this was early in the process and I hadn't gotten any of my people into the airport yet. And Matt said to me, he said, Esther, if it's just one, every soul is worth it. Every person we're fighting for to bring they are eternal souls, and every amount of our effort that we're putting in is worth it. If we only just get one person, it's worth it. And I will never forget that encouragement from Matt during that conversation. It was sometime in the middle of the night. We were both exhausted. Jumping back into the storyline, I was focused on helping Rahima, but everyone started learning, hey, Esther's involved. She's got connections. She's working to get people out. So here in the United States, anyone that knew that I was involved was reaching out, asking for help. So I have a friend, she worked at my parents' school, but then met and fell in love with an American. And so they lived here in the United States during that time. And her name's Parwana. Parwana called me and said, Esther, my family, my sister, her husband, and their two children, they're at this gate right now. Can you help them? And I said, okay, I'm trying to help this other group of students, these girls. I'm trying to help Rahima and the other girls, but hey, they're kind of on pause where they're at right now. So I have time to come in and help. So I helped this family, and the only God aspect of it. This whole story, Stephanie, is
Yeah.
only God. And they're standing so it was the way that things were playing out at the airport. During the day, things were very active and people would have to pack the Afghans that were trying to get out. They would have to pack water, food, extra phone batteries, phone chargers. There was no electricity really, but they'd have as many of the external phone chargers as they could go buy and bring those. So they knew when they left their home to the airport, there was no guarantee, but it was going to be a 3 to 5 day experience to try to get through the gates of the airport. And so they had to prepare for it. So this young family, a mom, the father had been a translator for the United States Army. So had he stayed in Afghanistan, he would have been killed, frankly.
Right. Yeah.
And
Big
their two
target.
young children. So during the day, there was a lot of activity, movement. Well, at night, people would just stay right where they were at, and they would just lay down on the ground and go to sleep wherever they were. So it got quiet at night. So we were able to accomplish a lot more at night. But this family got up. They were right next to the airport wall, and they'd been there for days. So they had just a tiny bit of water. I was on WhatsApp with them, and I was able to through my military connections, I was able to get connections inside the airport. So, and then through my congressional connections running for Congress, just had a lot of people helping me, whether it was expediting visa applications so that people could be approved once they got into the airport, they could be approved to get on a plane. So all these connections mattered. And so I had this major who said, "Hey, I'm going to be off in a few hours. I can go grab someone. Like, does anyone need a family that needs to be extracted and brought into the airport?" And I was like, me, I've got. So we had a plan, but it was still about 2 hours, and it was in the middle of the night in Afghanistan. It was daytime over here, but in the middle of the night, he's like, "Hey, I get off my shift in 2 hours," and so I'm put the family and the major in a WhatsApp group together, and they share their location, and so their phones were dying, and I was like, "Whatever you do, that pin that you sent, you have to be at that pin. If
Right.
your phones die, do not move." Because the major's going to come to that exact pin. And if your phones die in the next 2 hours, if you're not there, we're not losing this opportunity. So the father realized, hey, like the crowds are starting to wake up and movement is starting to happen and just the shifting of crowds. So he got his family in front of a chain link fence. He put his wife and two kids in front of him and just wired his arms through the fence and just held his family in the exact
Wow.
place that the pin was. And about 2 hours later, the major was able to come and they cut the fence, got the four of them in, and then he rewired the fence with zip ties so no one could follow in behind him. But he was able to go rescue that family and pull that family in. And they processed and were able to get on an airplane. And now they live in Texas here in the United States. So that's fast forwarding a little bit. And I've gotten beautiful thank you letters. And the kids actually drew me a storybook. So I had these drawings. They're actually quite haunting. They sent me a storybook of their experience and what was happening through that time period. So I have all these kid drawings of what happened to that family. So that was the first family, the first four Afghans we got in and just continued to work. It was people would reach out and I'd help people, but my whole focus was on Rahima.
Right.
And Stephanie, we had 8 failed attempts with Rahima where she would go, she would get up to a close area close to a gate. So Abbey Gate, which is the gate where the bombing happened.
Yeah.
So a very famous area of the Kabul airport from that time period. And the bombing happened days later. My Afghans, the people that I was helping were already into the airport by the time the bombing happened. That happened kind of towards the end of the whole withdrawal. At this time period, I had teachers from my dad's school. I had 4 teachers, all female, and they were right at the gate. So they got to Abbey Gate when they were processing people, checking visa paperwork, and they got to the gate. My 4 teachers were right at the front and they said, "Oh, it's sundown. We're closing." So they're like, "You can stay here and we'll start again tomorrow." So they shut the gate, shut everything down, and I had 4 people first in line. They were literally standing at Abbey Gate and they had to stay there overnight to be first in line for the next morning. And Rahima was in that same line. She was about 50 yards back, but there was a barrier of Taliban soldiers that were doing a passport. This is how incompetent this entire withdrawal was.
Yeah.
Our United States State Department outsourced passport checks and visa checks to our enemy. So the Taliban soldiers were in charge of
Totally insane.
checking passports and visas. So Rahima and her 2 cousins were 50 yards about. They could see each other, they could shout at each other, but she was first in line behind the Taliban soldiers. So same thing, they shut it down. Well, Rahima and her cousins, I couldn't get them past the Taliban soldiers that night. So they just lay down to sleep there. The Taliban soldiers were beating her and her cousins. They stole her laptop, her backpack. And she's such a resourceful 14-year-old. She negotiated with the Taliban soldiers. She said, "You can have all my stuff, but just give us our passports back. Give us our passports back." So the guy is just like some random soldier wanting money and he didn't care about the passport. So he did end up giving her the passports back. So her and her 3 cousins, they got everything stolen from them. They were whipped, beaten, just staying there overnight. But the hope that they would get through that gate the next morning was so strong that they stayed there and endured that. Well, in the middle of the night, I had another group of it was English soldiers that were there during this, and they were, "Hey, we're on patrol. We could stop. Is there anyone that has anyone like you're in like all these group chats and stuff?" So this information came out, and they're like, "Hey, and I've got a group of 4 teachers." So I had to make a decision. I was like, "Do I get these 4 teachers, and do I make the call to get these 4 teachers in, or do I wait until tomorrow morning and get the kids in with them and try and get everybody at once?" And as much as it broke my heart, I said, "Go get my 4 teachers. I can't risk them not getting in, even though Rahima is just behind the Taliban soldiers. If I wait till the next morning, maybe I can get all 8 of them in instead of just 4." But I said 4 is better than 0. So I went and these English soldiers got my 4 teachers in through the gates at 2 o'clock in the morning that night. Well, Rahima, the next morning, they had been worn out. They were out of water, out of phone charge. So they didn't make it past the Taliban soldiers. They got turned away. So they went home that night, slept, took showers, charged all their devices, and to start launch another effort. So
And so were they able to keep their phone when they had everything else stolen, or how did they have those
I
devices?
think I don't remember the exact details. That's a good question, but I know she had other phones. If like her dad had a phone, she had a phone, her brother had a phone, her cousin
Yeah,
had a
that
phone.
makes sense.
So the way they would do it is groups would go together and like they would all keep their phones off and use one phone at a time until it
Yeah,
died. And then they would turn the next phone on. And so that's how they kind of lasted for days.
that makes sense.
Is
Really
they'd
smart
have,
thinking too.
yeah, groups of people would go together. So I'd had 8 failed attempts. That's one example of the failed attempts, but I'd had 8 failed attempts with Rahima. And so I'm helping all these other people, but Rahima is the person that I'm like super focused on. We had just gotten I don't remember the exact timeline, but we had just gotten I don't remember if it was the same night or night later, but we had just gotten a family of 11 from my dad's school in through the gates. And I was working with another teacher that had formerly been in Afghanistan, and she now lived in the United States, but she, same as me, she cared about all these people, was helping, and we just were jumping in and doing. And she said, "Hey, I'm in this group of people that," and it was just a only God kind of group. And I still to this day, I don't know who was in that group, but there was someone from the State Department was in the group. There was a CIA agent in the group. There was someone I have later on, like a year or 2 later, I was going through my phone and I had this person saved in my phone as Magic Matt. And I was like, "What? Why do I like what did I do? Like, did I have some crazy night and like
Yeah.
me?" Yeah. And then I was like, "Oh, he's that guy. He was in that group with us." And I to this day I don't know who he was, but he's saved in my phone as Magic Matt, and he was part of this group of there was about 15 or 16 people, and they had just gotten this group of 11, this family of 11 in, and then they were looking for a new project or a new focus for getting them into the airport. And I was like, "Rahima, can we please choose Rahima?" And so the whole group was like, "Yes, let's get this girl in the airport." So I put Rahima in this group, and everyone did their part. So everyone from people here in the United States helping connect and get approval from the State Department to intel on what's going on at the airport, what's the best gate to send people to who's got connections on the inside to go get people. So we put Rahima, and on this attempt, it was Rahima and her father and her 2 brothers and her cousins were in a group together. And so I said, so they had just gotten home from a failed attempt. And then I heard on the news that the Taliban were closing streets. They were closing in so tightly to the airport that they were closing down streets. So there would be no access to the airport. So Rahima had just had a horrible failed attempt. She hadn't gone to bed yet. She had just showered and was about to go to bed after 3 days out trying to get into the airport. And I called her. I said, "Rahima, I know you're tired. I know you just got back from a failed attempt, but you have got to turn around and head back to the airport immediately because the Taliban is closing roads. And if we don't go right now, you might not be able to get there ever again." So her and her family just listened to me, and they went, and I put them in this WhatsApp group, and we had a plan. There was someone who had an identified tower, and then there was a major that was going to, in the middle of the night, he was going to go out. It was supposed to be Rahima and her family, and there was another family with a baby with a pink hat. That was like the identifying. We were trying to get these two families together, and then we had a major who had agreed, "Hey, when I get off tonight, I'm willing to go out. I'm willing to leave the airport and go out," because it was nighttime. He was willing to go out, and you kind of just like are hopping over people. And Rahima was supposed to get a piece of cardboard, and there was a symbol that she was going to draw on the piece of cardboard. And at the exact time, like you're holding it up, and then this major is going to come out and extract you and pull you into the airport. So we had a picture identifying the tower that she was going to meet this major at with the other family, and they were trying to get to the right place. Well, they got there all settled in, and she's there, and the major, it's in the middle of the night. The major comes out and is looking for them, and she's like, the major's like, "I can't find them." And Rahima's like, "I'm here with the cardboard. I'm holding it as high as I can." And by that time she was so tired. She's like, Miss Easter, my brain doesn't work. She was trying to do all this in English with us because we're
Right.
Americans. And this teacher who lived in Nebraska, she goes, "I have an idea. I know there's someone in my neighborhood that speaks Dari." And literally got into her car, drove across her neighborhood, banged on a stranger's house, and was like, "You're Afghan, right? Like, you speak the Dari language?" So, like, she just had heard of this person in her neighborhood and kind of knew where they lived and was running down the street being like, "Where's the family that speaks Dari? Where's the family that speaks
Oh
Dari?"
my gosh.
So this woman got a translator from Omaha, Nebraska on the phone, and I was telling Rahima instructions. It was a three-way call. This person in Nebraska was translating into Dari so that Rahima could do it with her tiredness. She could still understand in her native language rather than trying to translate into English.
Right.
She hadn't slept in days. And we come to find out the tower, there were two towers that looked very similar, and Rahima was at the wrong tower. And so the translator was able to give instruction in her native language, and Rahima was in the middle of the night. They were able to just climb over sleeping people and work their way across the airport, around the outside of the airport, to get to the right tower. And they met up with this major, and he was able to pull both families, Rahima and her family, and the baby with the pink hat, the family with the baby with the pink hat, into the airport. And then that was just the beginning point. She had we had a couple more days of getting them the right visa paperwork and getting them on an airplane. And day by day, it took like another couple days to get them through all of that in the Kabul airport and through. I believe Rahima went through Qatar is where she went. All the families were either being processed in Qatar or Germany, were the two kind of base points where they were bringing the Afghans and eventually bringing them all to the United States. And then when Rahima got to the United States, she tested positive for COVID. She got isolated at a hotel in Washington, D.C. She had to stay in isolation at a hotel in Washington, D.C. for 6 months once she got to the United States.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then fast forward, eventually she got out and I got to see her in person and meet her and love on her. And then her and her family moved to Oklahoma, which is where my dad lives. And my dad has just shepherded them and cared for them. And now 4 years later, Rahima's starting college, which is just so beautiful.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
What an incredible story. And one thing that, as you were telling the story, that like surfaced in my mind is, even though you had the goal of Rohima, a
Mhm.
lot of times we can get so focused on what we think maybe God's calling us to do, or the person that we're supposed to, be going
Mhm.
after, but you didn't lose sight of a bigger picture of, like, you saved a bunch of other people in the process, where you could have just kept saying, "Nope, I'm only focused on Rohima. Nope, I'm only focused on Rohima," and how many other lives were saved and impacted because you were willing to zoom out. And so I think it's just a great reminder is sometimes we think God's calling us to go down this one path, and maybe we can still be heading down that path, but it's like, "No, I've got some other things that I need you to accomplish along the way," and be willing to do that. And was that hard for you? Like, especially when you're talking about the 4 teachers and you have to make the decision at that moment. Your goal was Rahima, and, like, was that difficult?
Heart-wrenching, Stephanie, and our family, my dad obviously was super involved in all this because these were his students and his
Right.
teachers from their school that they started, and now we brought about 70 Afghan refugees. The whole time I focused on female teachers and high school female students, and of course, other relatives and people came along. So it wasn't all women, but the vast majority of the people we brought over were women. And so now they've all kind of settled in and around my dad in Oklahoma. And there's 70 Afghans that we were able to bring from his school to the United States. And I joke that my dad brought him missionary takeout because he was a missionary to Afghanistan for 13 years. And now his day to day, what he spends a lot of time doing is caring for these Afghans, helping them establish lives, get education, get their visas sorted out, teaching them to drive, teaching them how to, in the early days, they've all figured this out now, but in the early days, it was like, this is how you shop at Walmart. And
Right,
this is
like
the American.
assimilate into the
Yeah.
United States. I was reading, I can't remember the book, but it talked about, like, assimilation, and it's something like 9 years that it can
Mm,
take to
mm,
assimilate, and maybe that's a little off, but it made sense because you think about all the things that you have to learn about a new culture and laws and language, and, I mean, there's just so much that
right.
goes to it, and you're trying to survive also.
Right. And my dad's whole purpose and mission in continuing to love on these Afghans is to show them the love of Jesus because
Yeah.
that's what it's all about. And we've seen some of the salvations. There's been a few, 2 or 3 that have come to become Christian already. And Muslims are often on a long pathway to salvation. And so my dad knows that it's a long-term commitment.
Right, not a short game.
It's not a short game. I recently just brought Rahima to visit me and spent a weekend just loving on her and sharing Jesus with her. She's scared to because her whole community is Muslim, and she's like, "Esther, I hear what you're saying about Jesus, and I know he loves me, but I'm not ready." Like, that's what she told me.
Yeah.
But I'm in it for a lifetime, to love on her for a lifetime, to just share Jesus with her because he loves
Yeah.
her so much. And so that's genuinely what it's all about. It's only God. And I believe God brought them and saved them and used me and my family and
Yes.
all the connections and had me right. My name is Esther, right? So for such a time as this, I do believe that I was in that position for such a time as this because God loves these Afghans so much and he's passionately and persistently pursuing their hearts to the point that he rescued them and helped use me to do it so that they could come to a Christian country and learn about Jesus more openly and holistically. I totally believe that.
Yeah, well, and 2, it's like it's God's in control of the outcome of,
Mhm.
Rahima, and you're just doing the work that God's calling you to do and preaching and sharing the gospel and loving on her. I mean, at the end of the day, that's our job is just to love people. It's also interesting, I thought, of the timing of the passing of your mother
Mhm.
to where your father now is still surrounded with people that he can love on and care on and still have a purpose. And it seems like a lot of times, especially people who have been married a really long time, like your parents, is, almost like when one passes, the other one almost loses a purpose for living or something like that. And so I was just thinking about even the timing of the passing of your mom to then your dad have like ability to still step in and continue his ministry here, which,
Yeah.
actually your mother's family started in Afghanistan and carry on her heart. So that's incredible.
Was very insistent in her time of sickness. Again, my dad's name is Robert. She would say, "Robert, you're not allowed to follow me. You better not follow me. God has a plan and a purpose for you still beyond me going to heaven. You're not allowed to follow me."
Yeah, no. The other thing too I was thinking about is, your congressional run. It was very, like you said, it was a hot congressional run. At the end of the day, you put in all that work and effort, ended up losing. But do you think if you weren't running for Congress, you would have been able to do what you did in helping to rescue
Yeah.
Afghans?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think the answer is resoundingly no, that I wouldn't have been positioned to make that difference the way I did. I wanted to go back a thought to share, a book recommendation to share.
Yeah.
You talked about prayer, and that was absolutely the key aspect of the breakthroughs, the miracles that we saw was because of the prayer support that I was able to build towards the effort. People across the entire country, people that had supported my parents through decades of ministry, just the broad base of prayer support I had during that time. I recently read a book called Lead with Prayer is the title, and it's been a life-changing read for me personally in my role today, which I haven't talked about it yet.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm CEO of a Christian ministry called Youth Hope. And in my day to day that I have in this ministry, I don't survive without prayer. It is the message of this book, which is we all kind of, as Christians, if anyone listening is a Christian, you understand, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to pray. I'm talking to God. But to have prayer as your source of survival, I can't get through my day without prayer. That's the position I've entered into in my position now of I can't do what I'm doing without prayer. And that book has been really transformative to me of just how to lead with prayer. How do I prayer is my first response instead of, oh yeah, I should ask God about this and just seek his wisdom. But always 100% of the time I am desperate to hear from God. How do I find his will for this decision? Or how do I ask him to intervene in the natural? And how do I build those practices into my life as an individual, but also into a team and then more broadly into the body of Christ? So that's a really good book recommendation I just wanted to
No,
name.
that's good. As an author, I always love good books, and I love good books that have helped people. I
Mhm.
mean, at the end of the day, I always feel like obviously we have the Bible, but the Lord uses other books and Christians and speakers to do that. And I agree with you. I mean, I kind of developed this thing called the 4G method. And the first thing is a good morning. But the way you have a good morning is you're starting your day in prayer and letting God take the lead of your day. And then it's kind of that good reminder if you're starting in prayer, then you remember throughout the day of, "Oh, I've already prayed about this," or, "Oh, no, I need to pray about this." And then one thing that the Lord has really impressed upon me is, like, having a prayer team. I mean, if you are in ministry and doing well, and even if you're not in ministry, it's having, you and I were talking about it earlier of you surrounded yourself with people to be praying as you were going through this, situation within Afghanistan. But I think anywhere in life is we can walk alone, especially you and I are both independent women. We like to do things on our own. You know what I mean? Like it can be like, oh, I've got this. And we may be praying and discipline in it, but I think there's something about sharing our struggles with others and having them come in and you know, talking to God on our behalf and being an intercessor on our behalf. So I encourage anybody listening, like, get a prayer team, but pray too about who's supposed to be on that prayer team. Like, don't be the one to pick it. Let God pick your prayer team for you.
Yeah. I'll share this story too, only God's story. You mentioned my congressional run and how I was positioned. I'll share a mini story within the congressional run that
Yeah,
was
sure.
only God, and then I'll close by saying how kind of the pathway that led me to where I am now at Youth
Yeah,
Hope.
love it.
So, an only God story within the congressional run. There was in 2020 in my first race. That race was very much a bootstrapped, like eager entrepreneur, like I'm gonna do this. And by the like scraping every dollar and just doing our best, we came just so close to winning. It was a David versus Goliath would be another metaphor of
Yeah.
the little guy versus the giant. And towards the end of the race, yard signs are very popular as political candidates. So everybody wanted a yard sign. And we'd spent our budget on yard signs and we ran out. And that's a great problem to have, right? But um I people were mad at me because I'd run out of yard signs. They're like, "We want to support you and you don't have yard signs for us." And people don't realize, like, actually it's not the greatest use of money cuz it doesn't really win you votes, but it gets people like involved and
Right.
they're on your team. So it does matter, but it's not the best way to spend your money in a political campaign. So I was not going to be able to spend more money and I was just going to have to deal with angry people. I want a yard sign. Well, this gentleman named Jeff who owned a printing company called me and he had bid on my yard signs on the first round and I didn't choose to buy from him. And so he was mad at me after that decision. He's like, I gave you a good deal and then you didn't choose to use me as the vendor. And he expressed his upset. And then fast forward towards the end of the campaign, he called me and goes, Esther, I'm really unhappy about this, but God told me that I have to print 500 yard signs for you and give them to you.
My gosh.
So it's just but it was truly it was to me, it was the message of God's hand is on this. God is working. And to the point that he spoke to Jeff, the printing guy, and Jeff donated in kind 500 freshly printed signs to our campaign. And that was like the exact number we needed. It solved the problem of all the angry people.
Right.
It was exactly what we needed in that moment. But what it told me was God's hand is on you. God is looking out for you. And we ended up losing that race and we lost again the second time I ran. But my takeaway from that is if all of this was just simply for God to pursue my heart and he took me on this entire journey to stretch me beyond what I was personally capable of, because like you talked about, we're both independent women. We're competent. Like we know how to live life. But so God had to take me beyond what Esther is capable of doing into a realm where I'm just suspended in midair for him to show me, Esther, I've got you. This is about me. It's for my glory. It has nothing to do with you. And it has everything to do with you serving my plans and purpose for your life. And if the whole experience was simply for me to be pursued in that way by the King of the universe and his love for me, then so be it. And I'll share this, Stephanie, to close and tell you that I had a revelation recently when talking with my I'm in a part of a close-knit group of female friends and we do Bible study together. We pray with each other. In talking with one of my friends from that group recently, I had kind of an aha moment. I was sharing with her about this book called The Circle Maker. Mark Batterson is
Yeah.
the
I've read that.
author. And for people that aren't familiar with that book, the title is based on a story of I think he was a pastor or just someone from a church who was believing for revival. And he went into his church and he drew a chalk circle on the floor. And he said, I'm not going to leave this circle until God answers my prayer for revival and brings revival. And I read that book and I said, Stephanie, I prayed that prayer. I said, God, let revival start in this circle. That's the prayer from the story is let revival start in this circle with me. I'm in this chalk circle that I drew on the floor. God, let revival start in this circle. That was the prayer that the gentleman who was believing for revival prayed. I read that book and I started praying that prayer. I said, Lord, let revival start with me. Let revival start in this circle, metaphorically, if I draw a circle around myself. Let revival start in this circle. And I prayed that prayer during my first congressional run. And so you mentioned earlier, like, I thought I was going to win.
Yeah.
Projections were everything about the race was I was supposed to win, especially the second time. The first time it was a surprise that I was really close to winning. And then the second time I was the lead.
Yeah.
And I had this aha moment recently. And who knows, sometimes we interpret history differently looking back to kind of fit our in a way I'm like backwards projecting, but the aha moment I had recently in my conversation with my friend, I shared with her about this book and told her, yeah, I used to pray that prayer. And I realized I prayed that prayer in the early stages of my campaign, that's when I first read the book, and I started praying that prayer was in the early stages of my campaign. And I was like, what if I was supposed to win? And then I prayed that prayer, and God said, Esther is more willing than I originally thought. I had a plan for her. I was going to put her in government and use her for godly purpose in government, but she's surrendering her heart. And what if by praying that prayer, I changed the very course of my own life? And God said, oh, she's surrendering to me. I'm going to now use her, and I'm in ministry now, which is a whole irony because my whole family's in ministry. And I always talked about I'm the black sheep of the family because I'm in politics and you all are in ministry. But God heard me pray that prayer and said, Esther's willing to surrender. I'm going to take her from the path that I had her on. And now I'm going to use her for an even bigger and more important purpose. And because she's willing to let revival start with her. In the position I'm in, the ministry is called Youth Hope, and our mission, our mantra as an organization is we passionately and persistently pursue at-risk kids and teens through authentic relationship to lead them to Jesus. So I've gone from kind of being a third-tier policy influence in the political realm to literally being on the front lines and fighting for souls and bringing them into the kingdom of God. And so God saw my heart and said, Esther's willing to be used for something even more important to me and to bring more glory to my name by literally fighting to pull kids out of hell and bring them into heaven with her. And so I'm going to reorient her path. And instead of winning, I'm going to have her lose. I'm going to put her as part of this ministry to bring kids into the kingdom of God and to change the course of not just the future from a policy perspective, but literally on the front lines to work with kids and to help share Jesus with them and bring them into heaven with us.
Yeah.
And so that's an only God path.
Yeah, not one that you chose too. And I think sometimes like being willing to give up that maybe
Mm-hmm.
dream, I mean, that was a big one. I know for you, and then God going, "Wait, I'm gonna use you over here," because you could have continued to run or seek other political offices or stay in the realm of politics, I'm sure. And then to step in this role, which I know what you were telling me earlier is this is much harder than
Yes.
and never expected it. Thank you so much for just sharing your stories and sharing how God has not only used your family, but your grandparents, your parents, and just where He's brought you today. So thank you for sharing only stories that God could write.
Amen.
Hey, friends, thank you for joining me today on the Only God podcast. I hope today's story encouraged your faith and reminded you that God is still writing our stories each and every day. If you were inspired by this episode, please share, subscribe, and tell a friend. And to stay connected with me and find out about all my books and resources and events, go to shineforwardcreative.com. Have a fabulous day.